You can access the entire episode now on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, Rokfin, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. Have you found that it's been harder to find documentation and actually do hard research into some of these topics surrounding the JFK assassination, especially in the post-COVID era?
Yes, for sure. So archive.org, which is what I used for most of my research for years, is compromised. I don't know how else to put it.
It's all compromised.
When I first started going there 5 years ago or more, because I used it casually before I started my hardcore research, it was easy. I would put in a name of a subject, like a name, like Kerry Thornley or whatever, Jim Garrison. I'd put it in there, and I would get a very good Google algorithm-based search of their site that would have all the documents and all the stuff that I need, and it would come up perfectly. Now it's virtually impossible to find stuff, even if I know where it is. I have to save specific links to specific documents, because if you try to find them within their own search function, you can't. You get drowned with nonsense. I've also found at newspapers.com, particularly when all the COVID stuff started, if you were to search for COVID stuff, if you were to search for like coronavirus stuff that was going back to the 70s, right, for newspaper articles, what we would find is that you were drowned in clippings, because you can go into newspapers.com and cut clippings, and then all those clippings become publicly available if you allow them to be publicly available, and they would be incorporated into search results. I found in the coronavirus stuff, I would find hundreds of pages of clippings before it ever even got to any of the original articles. So there was an obvious intent to take the available search engines out there that are good for one specific thing and make them harder to use. Archive.org is virtually impossible to use now. So what I ended up doing is I just pulled the original batch documents from Garrison and Weisberg, and I just pull the original documents and keep them myself and retitle them and all that. But because trying to find them it's become a needle in a haystack. They're making it harder intentionally to find this stuff.
I've spoken with a few guests over the past few months that have similar theories about what's happening with these search engines and the combination of this AI chat GPT type technology, where it's possibly being integrated with the search engines to only bring up the information that is approved by our authorities and government, and any other type of research that goes against the agendas, that goes against any type of narrative, that it won't show up in the search engine.
So I tell everybody, when it comes to research, I only read certain particular books. Like, I try to get the vast majority of my information direct from documents. Like, forget about people's opinions. Just go right to the original root documents. And sorting through these documents has most certainly become a lot harder. I will say that all of the information that people need to come to conclusions, especially in historical documents like the ones that I deal with, the answers are all there. It's just a matter of being able to interpret it, right? These documents are like a 3D puzzle, and you can have pieces in place and you can have big gaps, but based on the positioning of certain pieces of the puzzle, you can be like, oh, now that I understand this relationship here, I can see what should fit over in this piece over here that's missing, right? And so the best way to really come to understand anything historically, because all this stuff can be found in genealogies. When you go through genealogies, you'll find relationships between players in Kennedy that you never thought would be there, and that opens up whole new perspectives, right? So what I tell everybody is the best sources of information for any kind of research are in the genealogy websites, like Ancestry and all that stuff, and was archive.org and newspapers.com. Newspapers.com is probably still the best, because this is another thing. Like, a lot of people today, they don't know what to censor from 50 years ago, right? Yeah. There are certain big things that I can tell you. So everyone freaks out over the Kennedy documents that they're still withholding. Let me tell you this. The Kennedy documents they're withholding are not a smoking gun for anything. They could give you all of them, and most people would read them and not have a goddamn clue what they are really telling them. But I'll tell you what they're really telling them. They're really telling them the story of a relationship between Jack Valenti, David Morales, Charles the Blade Taurine, and a guy named Harry Haller, or Harry Hall. Those 4 personnel records are the closest thing to smoking guns that they're going to find. I've looked at the list of things they're withholding. All 4 of those things directly connect to Jack Valenti's activities that were somewhat illicit. So this guy, Harry Hall, who was a somewhat mob guy, somewhat CIA guy, he was friends with Joe DiMaggio, and there's an interesting story about him that he had told one of his mob buddies that he was going to be on TV because he was going to be at the funeral of Marilyn Monroe, right? And they're like, yeah, you're full of shit, right? So, and sure enough, at the funeral of Marilyn Monroe, Harry Hall shows up there as a guest of Joe DiMaggio. Now, who's Harry Hall? Harry Hall is a fucking guy who was in tight with all these Chicago guys, but he was such a lying scumbag grifter that what he did was he got some letterhead from the White House with Jack Valenti's information on it, right? Jack Valenti's printed letterhead from the White House. And he used it to try to set up a deal to buy some weapons and jeeps, some sort of military surplus that he was trying to pull some kind of scam and then like sell to Cuba or something like that, right? And so that led directly to Jack Valenti's aliases, right? One of the aliases Jack Valenti used, I forget the last name, but it was Pierre something, right? And so then I find that Jack Valenti's letterhead is connected to Harry Haller, and Harry Haller was having this deal with Pierre somebody, and I'm like, holy shit. Jack Valenti and Harry Hall were involved in some kind of scam while Jack Valenti was in the White House. Unfucking believable, right? So all of the Harry Hall stuff is still withheld in the Kennedy files. I wonder fucking why. Because It will show the relationship with Jack Valenti and that whole incident, right? And so that'll out Jack Valenti as not having been this saint that they made him out to be. Then you have the David Morales files. David Morales, probably the most hardcore, total shitbag human being, but probably the most devastating, like when you think hardcore CIA, willing to do anything, kill anyone kind of guy, that was him. He was the epitome of the on-the-ground, mercenary thug. And he was on the Secret Service car with Jack Valenti when Jack Valenti fled from Dealey Plaza after shooting Kennedy from the grassy knoll, right? So the David Morales files, which I pray to God there's at least like 100,000 pages of files on him. I hope there's that much, because I would love to get my hands on that. But that, again, will show the relationship with Jack Valenti. Same thing with Charles the Blade Taurine. He was a hitman for the mob. And I have found his name associated with some of Jack Valenti's aliases, but that's all the information I have on him. But then when you look at the JFK files, a bunch of stuff on Charles the Blade Taurine is still withheld. So to me, all this stuff just connects back to Jack Valenti. They did release some of the Charles the Blade Taurine files just recently this year. There's 2 or 3 that they dropped, but none of those had any real significance, nor did they connect to Jack Valenti. But the stuff that's being withheld, like I said, the study of the assassination is the study of relationships. It is not the study of how many bullets there were in Dealey Plaza. It's irrelevant. The stuff that happened in Dealey Plaza, yes, there's a lot of evidentiary information there, but you can really come to figure out everything that happened there when you understand the major players, their relationships with each other, who was what, where, when, why, all that stuff, and the events of Dealey Plaza will fall into place. All you got to know is who knew who, and that's the most important stuff, and that's what these files will show.
Valente is so interesting. I can't wait till we actually get to do a full show on this guy. This is such an interesting cat, and he seems to have his hands all over this event.
He's got his hands all over so much, it's unreal. He was involved. So here's the weird thing. Like he's only in the White. So he shoots Kennedy on the grassy knoll. He ends up leaving in Air Force One with Lyndon Johnson on the plane. He's in the photograph, the famous photograph on Air Force One. And he goes on to stay in the White House, where, in my opinion, he was Johnson's boss.